Hello there folks, and welcome back to another video. In this one we're going to be doing another dive into one of the battle tomes with a quick review for the Hedonites of Slaanesh. But in the standard way that I do these, it's not going to be a deep dive, it is going to be a summation of 5 things that I think are cool about the battle tome and could potentially be reasons for you to maybe consider picking up this faction to run yourself in your games. So, as always, like, share, subscribe, drop your thoughts down below about the Hedonites of Slaanesh. Make sure to check out all of the various affiliate links as well, because if you get involved with those, you get a little bit of kickback, which is always fun. There's also a Ko-fi and all sorts of things as well there too, plus a membership as well. So if you're interested in getting a part of a YouTube membership, you can do. But yes, to join another cult, haha, we have the Hedonites of Slaanesh, who are the newest of the factions for Warhammer Age of Sigmar to get themselves a battle tome, ahead of the Ogres, which is coming up very, very soon indeed. So they got themselves one new miniature, which was a new character to lead the way for the faction. But if you are not aware of how Slaanesh sort of feed into the wider world of Warhammer Age of Sigmar and Warhammer in general, Slaanesh is the god of avarice, pleasure, ecstasy, all sorts of strange pleasures from various different walks of life. Dread and pleasure, as you can see there, resplendent in the title. And the god that is Slaanesh was bound away by the forces of the elves, so Teclis and the like. Again, you've got your big lovely map folder there, which is very nice to see. Love that that's still part of the collection. But anyway, yes, was bound away by the elves, by Teclis and the others, to make sure that the god could not feast on the souls of the elves anymore when it was glutted. And this is one of the first things that I love about this faction. I really like that the story of the chained god Slaanesh has been sort of taken forward and developed into something for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. There was a very long time where Slaanesh was essentially just going to be kind of forgotten, maybe because it was a little bit more of an adult take on chaos. Of course, you've got, you know, Khorne, Nurgle and Tzeentch, who are all horrifying in their own way, but it's a little bit easier to explain pestilence and murder and trickery than it is to talk about cavorting demons and pleasures of the flesh. And so Slaanesh was kind of locked away within a sort of portion of Age of Sigmar, and now is back in a big way, as you can see here. So was locked away by Tyrion, Teclis, Malerion, and Marathi. But over time, and this is what I really like with Age of Sigmar, and especially with the Hedonites of Slaanesh, is how slowly but surely the story is moving forward. And we're getting to see even more glimpses of what's happening as part of the expanding narrative for the various armies in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and in the case of Slaanesh, the fact that the chains are weakening around the god Slaanesh as it sort of dwells in this kind of nether region and is looking to burst forth once again. It's always been a fascinating one, seeing how it kind of interacts with the other Chaos Gods in a way as well, and how some of them aren't particularly happy with the fact that Slaanesh might finally break its bonds and make its way out into the world. But this then feeds into the idea that Slaanesh is almost kind of like a hidden army, a sect, a cabal, a series of cults throughout the mortal realms that aren't as outwardly pursuing glories and victories on the battlefield as maybe the likes of Khorne or Nurgle might have done in the sort of expanding world of the mortal realms. This then plays out in a really nice way, I think, in the way that the sort of the army is built up and the way that it sort of fits together. It's very much about this idea of it being this kind of, well, as it says here, like a carnival that kind of makes its way across the realms. What's always really cool is, and I like it here as well, is that this is a really nice sort of description of it that kind of broke it down that I was really drawn to. So often it is easy to tell when a chaos power has claimed a land. The Skaven leave rack and ruin in their wake. Hashut's legions do the same, if more methodically. Khorne creates battlefields that resonate with slaughter. Nurgle grows pustulant gardens, and even Tzeentch is predictable in its mutative unpredictability. Slaanesh, however, is usually more subtle, and it can be difficult at first to discern where he holds sway. The most obvious indicator is how everything simply seems more, too bright, too sweet-smelling, every sensation too crystalline, every indulgence presents itself to those disposed to them. Sunlit forests of soft grass cry out for wild trysts. Rivers run with sweet nectars, and fine ores and crystals encourage craftsmen to push their skills even higher. Yet gradually the facade cracks. Natural features contort into unsettling art. Flesh slowly overtakes plants and stone. Bloated and gluttonous flesh. Sliced and bleeding flesh. Everywhere becomes a taunting reflection of mortal sin, bathed in a lurid, violent glow. Through these lands the Sybarite carnivals wind, raising gilded pavilions as great revel sites or turning tumble-down towers to nauseating pleasure palaces. Some Sybarites build elaborate fortresses of ensorcelled silk or glass, citadels intended to as much to be seen as to be defended, but most have little interest in doing so. The lands are but temporary stages upon which to pursue their selfish thrills in their quest for ever more exhilarating conquests. So it's a really fascinating faction in that you could do some really cool things with them from a kind of kit bashing, conversion, army building point of view, where you could blend together some of the Cities of Sigmar stuff with the Slaaneshi stuff to create the idea that it is a sneaky force that has wove its web into the very fabric of a Cities of Sigmar city, fortress or whatever, and is then slowly taking it over. And I think that's a fascinating way of doing things for Slaanesh that gives them a lot more credit, a lot more depth, a lot more lore, a lot more interesting things to say about them, other than just tits, ass, sex, and violence. Although, of course, that is still part of what makes them, I suppose. Yeah, so that was one of the second things I really liked about where they were going with Slaanesh as an army on the tabletop. You have lots of cool stuff as well blended in. It's really nice to see that Sigvald is back in a big way. I remember reading the Sigvald novel from the days of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and he was actually a fascinating character. He's very much that kind of sort of a braggart, a fencer, a duelist, and all that kind of thing that does his own thing, that sits outside the realms of what Archaon might have planned, which I think is really fun, even though the Skaven are wreaking havoc across the lands and stuff like that. But yeah, really cool stuff to see that in there. There's a really interesting miniatures range. I think it's actually probably one of the best miniatures ranges from Games Workshop for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And that's saying something, but I just don't think people really give it necessarily the time of day. I think Slaanesh is a Marmite faction for a lot of people. It's a faction that kind of, to a lot of people, is really fascinating and interesting, and then to other people they just kind of dismiss it. Whereas I think Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch have actually, Khorne and Nurgle definitely have a draw from a lot of people, but even Tzeentch I think is more in the same pavilion, some might say, as Slaanesh, in that it kind of sits to the side rather than it being a sort of mainstream faction. But then again, I think that's because you can sort of blend it into different ways of building the force to make it more interesting, especially if you take the time and effort to do so. I will talk about the mask a little bit more. I talked about the Changeling in my Tzeentch video. The mask is definitely another one of those characters. I have marked their rules section, but I think I'll talk a little bit more about them as you can see here. So this is my third thing that I really like. The mask was once the most favoured of Slaanesh's demons. Now they are a warning as to the cost of offending the volatile Dark Prince. The mask's great gift is to dance, to weave dazzling sinuous displays of motion so intense that they can entrance even gods. Slaanesh delighted in their performances, but as so the legend goes, following a stinging defeat in the great game by his brother gods, he fell into a vindictive and brooding mien. The mask's attempts to soothe him by staging their greatest performances were taken as mockery. Each memory invoked a barb to his wounded pride. In a shrieking rage, the gods seized the mask and levelled a curse. If they wished to dance, then they would dance for eternity, never again to enjoy another sin or indulgence, unable to cease extolling the gods' glory through their performances, even for a moment. Still, the mask waltzes on across the battlefield to the realms. Every move is lethal, every graceful flick of a claw combines with the whirlwind of death, but the true peril of the mask is how their performances inveigle the mind, binding onlookers, join the pageants of pain and dance of dreaming. Orders collapse as the mask glides with a loathsome grace. Even the living dead are not immune to the demon's wiles, ancient bones jerking in spasming motions before they are definitely carved apart. And again, that really folds into the really nice way that, you know, you've got this kind of performance being played out by Slaanesh across the battlefield, and the way that it all comes together. And I think that's represented in their miniatures range as well, to a degree. You really get the idea of them being almost this carnival of sin that kind of exudes across the mortal realms. And I also like that they really took some time when it came to putting together the Hedonites of Slaanesh to not just focus in on, as I said, like tits and ass and that kind of stuff. There's also this idea of them being a faction, a worshippers of God that just wants more excess, and that excess comes across in the idea of gluttony as well, which is sort of represented here by this, you know, pavilion of perverse pleasures, like that, with gluttos or solion. Scolion? That's probably the way you say it. And I like that that is represented as part of the faction. Now, this is a much older miniature than some of the other ones in here as well, when they first got their big revamp for the game, alongside the likes of Shalaxi and that kind of thing. But it was nice to see that brought up as a part of what makes Slaanesh an interesting faction to play on the tabletop. And I love that that's still an element of the Force going forward, and it kind of really plays around with that idea of them sort of like indulging in all those various sins and vices across the battlefield. It's a very cool stuff indeed there, as you can see. Lots more stuff on the way that you build your armies in different ways as well, and the mixture of how you would bring together a lot of the mortal stuff alongside the demons. I would say maybe alongside, maybe I think Slaanesh is unique in the fact that I feel like their demons work really nicely when combined with their humans in terms of the look and feel of them. I really like the idea of demonettes and things like that added in amongst the ranks of regular humans, mortals that are fighting as part of Slaanesh's legions. Much more so than the likes of demons with Khorne and Nurgle. Maybe Nurgle fits into the same kind of thing, I suppose. But I genuinely think that maybe Slaanesh and Tzeentch are the two that you would definitely want to focus in on if you were looking to make a sort of demon mortal pact together on the tabletop, which is quite fun. And you can do the whole thing with bargaining and that kind of stuff as part of the Slaaneshi cult, which is really fun. It's nice to see that still mixed in as part of the way that they work on the tabletop. So yeah, lots of fun things for you to dive into here when it comes to the Force. You obviously have the two various versions of the miniatures in here for Slexi Hellmane and that kind of stuff. The Keeper of Secrets, Duquesa and Sinessa, which are the two variants of Slaanesh, the voice and the talon, which is really fun. The mask, as I was talking about, one of my favourite characters, and again has some really cool stuff there with the endless dance for the Dance of Dreaming, the Vervain of Slaanesh, and the Waltz of Lethargy, which can be used to influence your armies on the enemy armies on the tabletop. So some really fun stuff there, as you can see. And again, here's the demon element of it as well. So you've still got your demonettes, your seekers, and your fiends. I still think the seekers and the fiends mostly hold up. The demonettes really need a little bit of a revamp, I think, in terms of the miniatures. But otherwise, I think they're one of the demon forces that actually works quite nicely with what we already have in the modern Warhammer Age of Sigmar collection. There's the new model as well, which is the Lord of Hysteria. That is mixed in there as well. But essentially, you're not missing out on anything really when it comes to putting together a Slaaneshi force. If you were playing it in the past with the faction pack, this very much blends together the original stuff very, very nicely and builds an interesting force for you to use on the tabletop. You have a Spearhead army, which is actually much more demonic focused, which I think is quite fun, but it throws in the Thricefold Discord, which was one of the Underworld warbands, which is quite fun to see. So it's nice that they've really been playing around with those Underworld warbands and finding a new way to use them beyond just that card/board game that you've got. And I think they make sense as part of the Epicurean Revelers as your Spearhead force. It is interesting that there's not a single mortal as part of that, especially since they've got some really nice mortal miniatures. But it is what it is. It's a reasonably good starting point, and you're going to want to have the demons in there anyway when you're building a Slaaneshi force on the tabletop regardless. You also have your Path to Glory section, as always, so if you are somebody who's looking to play the narrative version of the game, and you can dive in and play around with that and have some fun. And again, the two new paths for you to follow, which are more themed towards the Hedonites of Slaanesh, with the path of the Princeling and the path of the Hedonist. And then, of course, you have your armies of renown. So you have one based around Sigvald, which is the decadent host. And the Court of the Godlings, which is based around Dekessa and Sinessa, your 2 demons, and alongside all of the other various demon forces. That's the way you wanted to go. Nice ones there. I think if I was going to do them, I'd probably do the Decadent Host. I quite like the idea of including that in there, because I think it really builds on the idea of this kind of like cavorting mass of revelers as they travel around the realms, guided by Sigvald's wants and needs. I think it's a really cool way of doing things. And of course they have their own traits, spell laws, artifacts of power, manifestation laws, and battle traits, and these are all separate from the ones you would have seen earlier in the book, essentially allowing you to create a more defined and narrative force for use on the tabletop. I will say I was quite fun, and it'll be no surprise that I picked this one, the Regiments of Renown, the Mistclad Revelers. So if you are looking to build yourself this sort of set of a wandering troop almost, and you have this with them. And yes, as you might have imagined, with the idea of them being mistclad, they can use the special rules as part of the Shard Speaker of Slaanesh and the Blissbarb Archers to kind of move through misty portals and that kind of thing in order to attack from where you least expect them to be. But a fun little set of miniatures there that you could throw in alongside all sorts of different armies from the Forces of Chaos to give it a little bit of an edge, especially if you're playing something like the Slayers of Darkness and you wanted to have a little bit more of a manoeuvrable force. Same thing to do with the Hellsmiths of Shut. There was also the new Regiment of Renown, which was the Accursed Reflection, which you will have seen in some of the box sets, and this is a more magical based one, so it's based around the ability to use the various spells, as you can see there, and again gives you a little bit more of a different option for playing around with that force on the tabletop. And then last but not least, you have your rules reference there as well, so it allows you to learn as you're playing and keep up to speed with everything. But yeah, that's just my thoughts, my 5 things that I love about the Hedonites of Slaanesh as a force in your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. An absolutely fascinating force, and one that probably has some of the best miniatures, I think, in the Warhammer Age of Sigmar range. The Mortal Realms has definitely evolved over the years, and I think the Hedonites of Slaanesh saw a exceptionally good range of miniatures come together when they got their revamp. I still think they're a little bit more of a forgotten force, maybe one of the lowest on the rung when it comes to the Chaos Gods. But if you're somebody who really likes painting and exploring fascinating ideas to do with kit bashing, converting, freehand work, all that kind of stuff, silks and playing around with different flesh tones and that kind of thing, the Slaanesh is a force for you that I think will give you lots of that in spades, and opens up the door to lots of really interesting ideas from a narrative point of view as well. So yeah, if you are interested by the Hedonites of Slaanesh, please let me know down in the comments below what you think of them as a force. As I say, Battletome is out there in the wild now, so if you are fascinated by them and you want to pick them up, please do so. Maybe even using some of the affiliate links that I have down in the comments and the description below. Anything you can do to help me out on that front is fantastic. I even have one for Wargames Atlantic if you're not interested in Warhammer Age of Sigmar and you want to grab yourself some historical miniatures. That'd be cool. But yeah, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. One of the things I enjoy is having a conversation with you down in the comments. So if you are somebody who wants to share their thoughts on the Hedonites of Slaanesh, please do so. And yeah, we'll have a chat. I'll be back with another video very, very soon. So I shall say bye-bye for now.